Hey everybody, so the NHL trade deadline is a few weeks away, coming up on April 12th, and in this video I want to take a look at some teams that I think could be pretty big sellers at the deadline and are going to use the current pieces that they have to sell off and try and bring in some more assets like prospects, draft picks, things like that to try and make their team better. Obviously, this is just a look at some possibilities. No guarantee that any of this is going to happen, but I wanted to go through 5 teams that I really think will probably be big sellers at the deadline, and we could see some pretty significant moves involving with them trying to sell off players to contenders and get, a good amount of assets back in return. So before we get into it, I just ask that you please hit that subscribe button and thumbs up if you haven't yet. It helps the channel an absolute ton and is greatly appreciated. But let's get started here. And I want to start with the Nashville Predators because this is a team that has been talked about an absolute ton with regards to selling at the deadline. And Nashville's obviously had a very disappointing season, and they've got some big contracts. So when you look at the Predators and who they could potentially sell off on, the first guy that is getting a ton of talk about him is Mattias Ekholm. They're one of their top 4 defensemen, and there are tons of teams around the league who could desperately use the infusion of a top 4 defenseman into their lineup. So Ekholm is a guy that's getting a lot of talk right now, as is forward Filip Forsberg. I know Forsberg is a highly touted top 6 winger who can score goals and very, talented player who's still in his mid-20s. There's been quite a bit of talk about the Predators possibly, getting Forsberg out of there for a big package in return. Mikael Granlund and Erik Haula, both of these guys are kind of middle 6 forwards, probably best suited for your third line on a contending team. But they're both UFAs at the end of the season, so obviously better than them just leaving. Nashville would probably want to get a pick or something back in return for Haula or Granlund, and both of those guys would certainly provide value to a playoff level team, probably in a third line role for a team that's looking to improve there. Finally, I want to talk about Mark Borowiecki, who's kind of a third pair depth defenseman, very physical, the kind of depth defenseman that teams like to add heading into the playoffs. So there's another guy that they could possibly get a pick back in return for, maybe a third round pick or something like that for a guy like Mark Borowiecki if a team's looking to add to their defense depth and their team toughness. Couple guys that I have question marks next to because this would be a much bigger move and I don't think is likely to happen at the deadline. But Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson, both of these guys have severely underperformed for the past couple of years. They're really, really struggling this year. And they're guys that are on big contracts. That's why I don't think that a trade involving them would happen at the deadline. I think that'd be more of an off-season move. But if Nashville really wanted to make a huge splash, or a team wanted to add one of these guys to their lineup and make a huge kind of big game type move, those would be 2 guys that could potentially be looked at for one of those blockbuster type trades. But I don't think that those are likely to happen. That's why I separated them from everyone else earlier on the list. But off-season, that could be a different story. Moving on now to team number 2 that I want to talk about, the Detroit Red Wings. So the Red Wings are obviously very much in a rebuild right now. Stevie Yzerman knows what he is doing when it comes to that. He is going to take veteran players and try and get assets in return for them, whether they're picks, whether they're prospects. He's going to be doing some work at the trade deadline. Forward Bobby Ryan immediately jumps out as a guy that would provide a lot of depth scoring value to a contending team, while probably bringing back a pretty decent asset in return to the Red Wings. So I think Ryan would be likely to get talked about as far as moving goes. Sam Gagner is another one who probably playing on the 4th line of a contending team, but could really bring some depth scoring, and a guy that doesn't necessarily have to play on a daily basis. He could be your extra forward, and then if you have injuries, Gagner comes into the lineup and might be able to provide some some veteran leadership and a little bit of offense there on a good team. So, he's a guy that I think would have a little bit of value at the deadline. As far as defensemen go, I think John Merrill and Mark Stahl are both depth veteran guys that you could see added by a team looking just to add defensive depth. Maybe they need a number 7. They need another NHL guy to go into the playoffs with. I think Merrill or Stahl could fit that number 7 role on a good team very, very well. So you could maybe get a late round pick for those guys. Goaltender Jonathan Bernier, he's played fantastic over the past couple of years for the Red Wings. Obviously, he hasn't won a lot of games because the Red Wings haven't won a lot, but his play has been awesome, and his individual numbers have been quite good. So a team looking for a backup goaltender, or even a team looking for like a 1B type guy, could go after a Jonathan Bernier. And forward Luke Glendening is another guy that I think could add some depth value. He's very good in the face-off dot. He kills penalties. He's not going to really give you much offensively, but if you're looking for kind of a face-off guy, a fourth liner that plays good in the defensive zone, Luke Glendening might be a guy that a team looking to add depth up front would look at as, a very low-cost option at this deadline. And a guy that I have a question mark next to because I think it would be a much bigger deal, and again, not necessarily something that's likely to happen at the deadline, but more something that would happen in the offseason, is if Detroit is looking to move Anthony Mantha. I know they just signed him to a big deal this past offseason, but I don't think they're against moving Mantha because, he's not putting up huge numbers, and I think if the right package was offered back in return, they would definitely consider sending Anthony Mantha out of Detroit. I really don't think there's any truly untouchable players other than maybe Dylan Larkin with this Red Wings team. I think almost anybody else that they would consider if the price was right. And even Larkin, if they got a huge offer for Larkin, maybe they do, but I don't foresee that happening. But Mantha is a guy that I really think they could move from if they got a decent offer or package offered for him. Next team I want to talk about, the Buffalo Sabres. Obviously, we know that Buffalo's last in the league right now. They've really, really struggled this season, and they've got pieces that they might be looking to move on from here. Taylor Hall, again, UFA at the end of the season. What are the chances that he comes back? Probably not very high. Now, Taylor Hall does have a no movement clause, so he would have to okay the deal. But at the same time, I think Hall would very likely okay a trade to a contending team. There are certainly going to be teams out there that are big game hunting, looking for a top 6 scorer. Hall certainly fits that mold. I think him, Philip Forsberg are both guys that those teams would be looking at if they're looking to add a high-end scorer. So Hall's definitely a possibility at the deadline. Eric Stahl, veteran center, I still think could be a decent middle 6 guy on a good team, particularly probably now a third line center on a good team, but Stahl still has value, and he could be moved. Defenseman Brandon Montour is a guy that I think teams could be looking at as more of like a third line or third pairing guy. I think there could be some interest for Montour, especially if the Sabres were willing to retain a little bit of salary. And forward Tobias Reeder is kind of a depth guy that, again, if you're looking to add to your fourth line, you might be going for a guy like Toby Reeder who can bring some speed, penalty killing ability, and a little bit of offensive upside as well from a fourth line type guy who's probably pretty low cost. Then, obviously, we have to mention Jack Eichel. Now, he's likely going to be done for the season with injury, which certainly makes him being traded at the deadline very, very unlikely, which, again, I don't think this is going to happen at the deadline. There's almost no chance of this happening at the deadline, in my opinion. I think this would be an off-season move. That's why I put the question mark and put off-season next to him, because I don't see it happening now. But there has been a lot of talks involving Jack Eichel. He's obviously a big, big name, a superstar player, and somebody that there certainly would be interest for around the league. I just look at that more as an off-season deal and not something that would happen at the deadline. I would think that anyway, just because of the amount of money involved. Never mind now with the injury involved. That's guaranteed now to be an off-season move, almost guaranteed in my opinion. Next team I want to talk about is the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks are in an interesting situation here, but they've got a lot of young talent. I think they're going to want to move on from some of those older guys, though, that are, are a little bit too ahead of where the team is right now, and try and build around, Zegras and Drysdale, Terry, Comtois, Sam Steele, these young guys that they have in place there. That they're really starting to build around. So I think Josh Manson, if he can ever get healthy, very, very possible that he moves at the deadline. Adam Henrique, maybe as a third-line center on a contending team, would have some value. Derek Grant is another guy that I think is a depth forward, could have some value on a contending team as a depth piece. And then some guys that are a little bit bigger names, that I have question marks next to, because they would be pretty sizable deals if they were to happen. And again, I'm not sure if we're going to see a lot of that at the deadline. But Jakob Silfverberg, Ricard Raquel, and goaltender John Gibson all could possibly be moved. I mean, those would have to be pretty big moves, but it's definitely a possibility. And I think it's even more likely come the offseason that at least one of those guys gets moved before next season, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. And finally, the last team is the Arizona Coyotes. There's been a lot of talk, particularly about their veteran defensemen. Arizona moving on from guys like Nicholas Hjalmarsson, Alex Goligoski, Jason Demers. Those are guys that certainly could possibly be moved at the deadline to a team looking to add defense. That might be, the teams that miss out on Matthias Ekholm would probably be in on Hjalmarsson and Goligoski. Demers would be an even more low-cost depth option than that. And then forward, Derek Brassard. I still think Brassard can be a valuable middle six player on a playoff team. He was on the Islanders last year and was pretty, solid as a third liner in the playoffs. I think he could do that again this season. And Drake Caggiula is another forward that I think, would add some fourth line or even extra forward depth to a team that they might be looking at a guy like Caggiula at the deadline. So that's definitely a possibility. And then a huge name, obviously, that I don't think it's likely. I think it's more likely to happen in the offseason because of the amount of money involved and the name, and it's Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Again, I put him up there because there have been some trade talks or rumors about him, but I personally think that would be an off-season thing and not something that would happen at the deadline. And he's got a no-movement clause as well, so he has complete control there, and I don't think he would want to be moved mid-season. So that's something to look for, maybe more around draft time. But I did want to just throw his name up there, separated from the group, because there have been a little bit of discussions about him, but I don't think that that's likely to happen. But anyway, guys, those are 5 teams that I think could be very active sellers at the deadline. We have the Nashville Predators, the Detroit Red Wings, the Buffalo Sabres, the Anaheim Ducks, and the Arizona Coyotes. They all have pieces that will be valuable to teams looking to buy, and these are teams that are not in position to make the playoffs, not gonna be really, I think, even close to making a push for the playoffs, so they're very likely to be sellers. And it's better to get something for these guys, and a lot of them are UFAs that you would just let walk, that would probably be walking at the end of the year. So you'd rather get assets in return for them here. And there are definitely teams out there that would be willing to make a move for a lot of these pieces. So just some thoughts there. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our Patreon merchandise store donation link and now channel memberships are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.